Welcome to BrewFanatics TV. Josh and Dave hanging out. Today's a pretty exciting day. We get to crack open our Irish red ale that we brewed up a couple of weeks ago. And if you haven't been following us, our intention was to actually boil make two separate batches of the same recipe of the red ale, basically only changing the mash temperature, having a high temperature mash, which was at about 150 degrees, and a low temperature mash, which was at about 140 degrees. And just wanted to see what kind of changes we would actually find in the beer and the end result from only changing those two things and trying to keep everything else the same. What are your thoughts thus far, Josh?
Well, we've had some interesting things happen with the appearance of the beer. We got a little bit darker color in one of the batches, and the other, I think that mostly just came from the boil and the vigor of the boil and the type of pot we're using. We'll see if that translates into a difference in flavor. We saw some differences in the appearance of the yeast in each of the fermenters. You can take a quick look here and see the difference. In one batch, the yeast were clumping together very closely, and the other one we got kind of more of a fine sedimentation of yeast at the bottom of the fermenter. So I'll be really curious to see what the difference in flavor is, if there's any that we can perceive.
Fantastic. So we've got separate bottles here. I've got the low temperature, and I think Josh has the higher temperature one, so we'll crack the low temperature first. And hopefully it's carbonated enough too. Got a little carbonation action there. It's good. Alright.
Why don't you get this one going too?
Alright, here you go. Where's the other glass?
Right here.
I need that. Alright, so now I get the high temperature one. That's a little bit more carbonated. I don't know if... and definitely a little more head.
Alright, so you guys can, I don't know if you can see that real well. We'll see if you can see any difference in the color. Little difference in the amount of carbonation. That's just as easily a result of the difference in the priming sugar we put in. I'm not thinking there's anything real big difference about the beer itself and the appearance of the head, but we'll see. There could be. So why don't you go ahead and give that one a try?
Oh. Well, it's pretty good. A little caramely. Not as hoppy as I thought it was going to smell, because I know we actually added the hops a little bit sooner than we had intended by the recipe, and thought we were going to come up with a hoppy beer. So not a whole lot of, no hop aroma really that I was expecting to get. It's good.
Good amount of roastiness, for about what we'd expect, and definitely a good amount of mouthfeel. Okay.
That's the high temperature mash.
That's the high temperature mash one?
Yeah.
So I'll give the low temperature mash a try.
And not quite as strong as the caramely aroma that I smelled on that one, but flavor's definitely, it's a little bit different. I'm going to try to figure out what the difference is. It does feel lighter too. It doesn't feel like as heavy of a body.
There is a small perceptible difference in the flavor. I don't quite have the vocabulary to describe that difference very well. Well, I'm going to have to go look up a little bit about, some of these different flavors we might be experiencing. A little difference in the mouthfeel, too, could be a result of the amount of carbonation, the difference in the amount of carbonation between the two. A little hard to account for that with some of the other flavors. But I think they're they're both a solid effort. I'm liking the first one a little bit better at this point.
Me too.
Just from an overall enjoyability standpoint.
I mean, look at the clarity too. To me, I mean, it looks like, actually it looks like the low temperature mash is a little bit clearer. What do you think?
It's a little lighter in color too.
Yeah. But they both have a really nice red color to them. I think the color came out nice on both of them. This looks just a little bit more red. This kind of looks a little bit more amber to me. But it's homemade beer. It tastes pretty good, and I'm sure we'll enjoy the rest of the batch. So,
absolutely. Just let this be an encouragement to you guys to make some beer at home. It's not hard. You can make really good, enjoyable beer for you and your friends and anybody that comes over. So, cheers.
Salud.
Brew on.
All right, so we got the high temperature mash, which is on your right, my left, and the low temperature mash on my right, your left. And you can see the low temperature mash seems to be a little bit more clear. It's still a little, so clarity's a little bit better. The color is a little bit darker in the low temperature mash, which is to be expected. I mean, if you look at the, the original pictures that we had from, just after the boil, even before we got it, as we got into the fermenters, the lower temperature mash was a little bit darker. And like Josh said, we're kind of thinking that as far as the carbonation goes, even though this higher temperature mash seems to be a little bit more carbonated, that could just be from the priming sugar anyway, so not being evenly distributed. So we're not really taking that too much into account. But we also want to keep in mind that the higher temperature mash sample, or the batch, is at about 5.2, I believe it was, ABV, whereas the low temperature mash is at 4.5. I think we both kind of noticed that there was some aftertaste, just kind of in the finish on the higher temperature mash that we don't like. Can't exactly put our finger on it, but it's just kind of, Josh described it as home brewy. So I think anyone that's been making beer at home for any amount of time knows that there are those batches that weren't as good as the others. So we've all been there.
Yeah.
And I think if we were to do this again, we definitely want to stick with the lower temperature mash. What do you think?
I would definitely put it in the lower range of a little more typical brew.
This lower temp's pretty enjoyable though. And it doesn't have that same aftertaste. See what happens with the rest of the bottle. Alright, so in conclusion, let's take a look at everything we learned from changing the mash temperature from 140 degrees to 150 degrees. From the beginning, we noticed that quicker onset of fermentation on that lower mash temperature. And we noticed the lower mash temperature was a little bit darker, even in the fermenter. Also at the end, the higher temp mash came out with a little bit higher ABV, almost a full percentage more. And then when we tasted it, I think both Josh and I would agree that we would prefer the lower temp mash. Just had a little bit better flavor. There's a little bit of an aftertaste in the higher temp mash. It just kind of reminded me almost of like a malt liquor. I mean, definitely wasn't that strong or potent, but just not exactly an aftertaste, not exactly a finish that you would expect from a nice, easy drinking red ale. So I think that in the future, we'd recommend the lower temp mash. That's what we'll stick with our future recipes. So get out there on the website and vote for the mug. I can't believe my mug is behind. It's the best thing to drink a cold beer out of, or a warm beer. If you're drinking an ale that warms up a little bit. So all in all, I think it was may not have been an epic experience, like our friend Wenchy will say over there at drinkwiththewench.com, but definitely a good learning experience overall, and I'm sure we'll do some more experiments in some of our batches to come, just to see what kind of outcomes that we get.